Of the countless hours I've spent in the woods, it's the one time, the only few seconds, that I can't explain. My scariest experience though happened at about 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for another 30 to 45 minutes, another hour past that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack, and I froze solid. This is the part one have trouble describing. 0430 in springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of here. To describe it as best I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree. More a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack and not a thud or thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there, completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant, as soon as I got the courage to move towards this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head's somewhere between meth fiend murder and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass. I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 to 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180 turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying to be quiet, taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagine wet, rotten death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and the first light was showing. I didn't stop moving until full light was out, and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall, and especially leafed-out branches, make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. I don't know. 10 years ago, when I was a skinny little 17-year-old, I was hiking the rural side of a levee with a friend who was even scrawnier than I was. It was a long, long walk into the woods, and for about an hour or more we hadn't seen anyone else. Just trees and foliage. We finally stumbled upon a huge nest-looking area. It was so random and out of place, so we investigated. There was paper and cloth everywhere, torn magazine pages, old clothes, cans, everything piled into one huge mess. We assumed maybe people drove their truck out here and dumped their trash, so we just turned to leave, but in that very moment we saw a tall, rugged man wearing all black staring right at us. He was maybe 6'3", had shaggy unkempt hair, and looked dirty and disturbed. He stood 15 feet away, and he was just staring and silent. My friend didn't say something, so I said, "Hi. Do you live here? Is this your stuff?" And he only nodded yes, and then we slowly backed away and left. He just stared at us until we could no longer see him anymore, and then we picked up speed to get back to civilization. My partner and I were deep in Mt. Adams Wilderness Area, Washington State, U.S., and there were no other campers around. We had spent the day fishing and exploring the creek around our camp. Around 2 a.m., he wakes me up and tells me to be quiet. Our little dog is quietly growling and looking in one direction. About 15 yards north of the tent, I can hear rustling and a woman's voice speaking quietly to herself. Couldn't discern any words. There is no light, just the voice and the walking noise. It goes quiet and then picks back up on the other side of the tent, which is even deeper woods. Then it faded off into the dense forest. My partner had literally grabbed his gun and was getting ready to confront them, but since it seemed to move on, nothing ever came of it. I cannot stress enough how deep these woods were. We had explored the day before, and I had scratches from twigs and branches. It was so dense. The fact that there was someone alone wandering around talking to themselves in the middle of the night without a light or camp is so freaky, and I still get chills whenever I think about it. The next morning we investigated and didn't find any tracks, but there was a really haphazardly lit fire, charred remains, in the middle of forest/logging road about a mile up. It was still kind of warm. I know there is a small town, about 150 people, about 10 miles south from where we were camped. So maybe it was a drunk teenager? We were almost touching the Yakima Indian Reservation also, and the logging roads were still actively used. But still, so bizarre.